Good morning and welcome to Sunday morning at the Marxist Forum. Though I have to admit that today's not a good morning for those of us who are in the Middle East and those of us who are hoping for the end of U.S. imperialism. Today is not a very good day for those folks. But for the Marxist Forum, we've been going for over a decade and a half. We've been meeting religiously every Sunday morning. And now that we're on Zoom, we are able to reach people outside of our immediate San Francisco Bay Area. And so it's good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to people who are listening in today. These programs are organized by the Institute for the Critical Study of Society, the ICSS, and this session is being recorded and will be posted on YouTube. So to look for the YouTube link, look at our website, and our website is ICSMarx, MARX.org. And it turns out that this morning our website is down, but hopefully we'll get that website up right away. But the ICSSMarx.org website just is temporarily down for at this moment. My name is Roger Harris, and I'm with the Marxist Forum and part of the program committee. And we try to bring programs in the Marxist tradition, though you don't have to be a Marxist to either participate or to be a presenter here. But we do urge you to sign up for our programs on our website when it gets back up. And we also urge you to make donations because we do have expenses. And again, you could find a donation information on our website. Today, we're going to address a very, very timely problem, and that is the issue of fascism, particularly the issue of fascism in the United States. Our speaker today is Stan Smith, and Stan has just written a very important article on this, and he's with the Chicago Committee, the Chicago Alba Group, and he has a long history of political activism in the United States, particularly around solidarity with Cuba, Venezuela, and Nicaragua. And we recommend his website, which is chicagoalbasolidarity.org. I'll try to put that in the chat. And so let's jump into it. So Stan, is what we're experiencing right now what we'd call fascism?
Uh, no, I can't say it is. It's just regular how bourgeois democracy works. Um, yeah, I find one thing that's, well, thank you for having me on here again. I forgot to mention that I enjoy being on here and listening. The question and answer is always interesting to listen to, and I learn a lot from it. Um, I started before, when Trump was elected in 2016, I wrote something about comparing him with Hitler because that was all the rage back then. Now, started again when he was running for president last fall and looked like he was going to win. But it is interesting that these people who say that Trump is a fascist or now the U.S. is fascist, they have to say, well, Trump was a fascist and he was voted out in the election in 2020. Now, it would make you think if what's your understanding of fascism. Is it conceivable that Hitler or Mussolini could have been voted out of power? If you're going to compare Trump with them, like how do you can't explain that. But I think what we have in the U.S. is a dictatorship by the capitalist class that uses a charade of bourgeois democracy to rule over us. And every 4 years, we hear this story that this election is the most important in our lifetime, and the Republicans are the new fascists, and the Democrats are the lesser evil. Last time, it really didn't matter that Biden was greenlighting a mass slaughter in Gaza, and it didn't matter that he provoked the war with Russia and Ukraine that killed, I don't know, hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people. Trump is still the Hitler figure, not Biden. Let me go back and Before I was reading some of William Shirer's book, The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich, and it's interesting to go over what was happening in Germany in 1932-33. Hitler came to power in January 30th, 1933. But Germany already by that time in the summer 32 was a completely different kind of country than the US is today. It had a population of 66 million and unemployment was 30%. Now, there were three contending parties in the July 1932 elections, which could be called socialist if you want. There was the National Socialist German Workers' Party, the Nazis, the Social Democrats, and the Communists. And each of them won millions of votes. And those were the three major contenders. Now we have to go back in that time. People did not really make a big distinction between Nazis and communists back then. I mean, the Nazis would say, we are national socialists. We are not international socialists. And a lot of people back then were like, well, these are just different versions of socialism. And actually, there was a certain amount of people joining and quitting and rejoining the Nazi Party and the Communist Party. It was the opposition between the two that we imagine today. It didn't really exist at that time. They were just considered different versions of socialism. Now, the German Communist Party back in 1932 had 360,000 members, and they had their own paramilitary organizations. The Social Democratic Party had 1 million members, and they owned their own paramilitary organizations also. And the Nazis had 1.5 million members, with about 500,000 who were stormtroopers, or brown shirts, as they're also called. Now, this situation is no relation to the U.S. today in the elections, because here we don't have three different versions of socialism to choose from in a presidential election. You have one traditional corporate party that's run by the 1%, and if you don't like that corporate party, you have another traditional corporate party run by the 1%, and that's, you can choose which one you think is better for you. Now, back in 1932, when they had the election in Germany, in Prussia, in that particular area of Prussia, which had 2/3 of Germany's population, William Shirer says in his book that between June 1st and June 20th, 1932, there were 461 pitched battles in the streets, which cost 82 lives and seriously wounded 400 men. And in July, 38 Nazis and 30 communists were among the 86 dead. On July 10th, 18 people were killed, and a week later, when the Nazis marched in a suburb of Hamburg, 19 people were shot dead and 285 wounded. So that was the situation, electoral situation in Germany back in 1932. So we have in 6 weeks, 200 people being murdered in parts of Germany where 40 million people lived. If we're going to translate that into US numbers, that would mean in a 6-week period in the 2024 presidential election, 1,700 people would be killed in the United States in fascist and anti-fascist violence. So I think that's pretty well shows how ridiculous to say that, we're living under fascism now. But in the November 32 election, the two socialist parties, the Social Democrats and the Communists, won 37% of the votes. And the Nazis and the German Nationalists, which was another right-wing party, won 39%. And then 2 months later, Hitler was appointed the Chancellor of Germany. Once in power, Hitler quickly purged the nation's police forces. All police chiefs around the country were replaced with Nazis. the police were ordered not to interfere with the work of stormtroopers in the Nazi SS. In just 2 weeks, Hitler's stormtroopers had the In 2 weeks of Hitler taking power, Hitler's stormtroopers had license to beat and even killed leftists and Jews. Here and then under Trump, his main target's been non-white immigrants. But whatever he says, he has deported fewer people than Biden has in the last term parts of his uh, presidency back in 2024. Um, February 22nd, 1933, which is just a little less of Hitler being in power a month. He had 50,000 stormtroopers and SS men made part of the German police forces. Now, to translate that into US figures, if Trump was some fascist like Hitler, that would mean that Trump had incorporated like 250,000 Klansmen into the police forces in the United States. Now, it took 3 weeks for Hitler being in power to have the police forces in Nazi hands, while another 2 million stormtroopers patrolled the streets. Mass arrests began and public buildings and homes were raided to seize political opponents, often thrown into newly constructed camps that Hitler was building, these concentration camps. A month after Hitler was in power, the Reichstag was burned, their version of Congress, and the Nazis blamed the communists for it. And then Nazis declared the emergency decree, which was basically like martial law. And that's when the real anti-communist witch hunt began in Nazi Germany, a month after Hitler had been in power. So truckloads of stormtroopers ran around the country carting up and hauling off for imprisonment and torture all sorts of communists and other opponents. Nazis seized the Communist Party headquarters. They banned their meetings. Their press was shut down. The Nazis confiscated all the Communist Party funds, and their deputies in the parliament were in the Reichstag were arrested. The Social Democrats also suffered the same fate, though their party wasn't outlawed until June 1933. So, in sum, it took a month for the new Nazi regime to behead the left in Germany. That's what actual fascism is in action. Which, I mean, you think about what he's done, I mean, it's like remarkable he was able to so crush the opposition so quickly. So those fantasizing Hitler fascism, there's a reality check here. His first month in power, Hitler had licensed imprisonment without trial, turned over policing in the judicial system to the equivalent of the KKK, imprisoned and driven underground thousands of liberal, communist, and social democratic opponents. Stormtroopers and SS thugs took over town halls, trade union offices, newspapers, businesses, and removed unreliable court judges in the courts. 60 days in power, on March 21st, 1933, the Nazis made it a crime to criticize the Nazi Party. April 7th, 1933 is when all Jews were dismissed from their civil service jobs. And Nazi governors were also appointed in all German states, having the power to appoint and remove city and town governments, dissolve state assemblies, and appoint and dismiss state officials and judges, which would be like saying April 7th, 3 months after being in power, Trump removed all Democratic elected officials across the country in every state government and every local and city government, and replaced them all with Nazis or MAGA people. On May 2nd, Hitler destroyed the trade union movement, and all the trade union offices were occupied All trade union property and funds were seized, and trade union leaders arrested, and the trade unions reorganized as the Nazis' German Labor Front. There were now 2 million Nazi stormtroopers, and given Germany's population of 66 million, if Trump had a comparable fascist gang, it would number 10 million. As Shirer says in his book, these brown-shirted gangs roamed the streets, arresting and beating up and sometimes murdering whoever they pleased while the police looked on without lifting a nightstick. Judges were intimidated. They were afraid for their lives, and if they convicted and sentenced a stormtrooper, they're afraid for their lives, even if they convicted and sentenced a stormtrooper for cold-blooded murder. So this is hardly what we see in Trump with the MAGA movement here. Nothing similar at all. Now, by 1935, 20% of the German Communist Party members, 30,000 of them, were in concentration camps. They were the most militant element of the anti-Nazi resistance. Another 10% of the Communist Party members continued underground work, but the Nazis soon rounded up, imprisoned, and executed a high percent of them. And by 1939, 30,000 communists, German communists, had been executed, and 150,000 more German communists were sent to concentration camps. Now that was fascism in real life, not the make-believe one that some liberal leftists imagine here in the US today. Trump has not thrown out the Constitution, wiped out the AFL-CIO, banned political parties, removed all Democratic Party elected officials and judges from office, nor has he sent any political opponents to concentration camps. So what are these claims? What originates these claims about Trump fascism? In almost every presidential election going back generations, people on the liberal left resort to this scare tactic of Republican Party fascism. When I first became a little politically aware, that was when Nixon was running for president. The left liberals may admit that corporate America owns the two parties, and even Bernie Sanders still says that today, that the corporate elite run both parties, Democrat and Republican. Yeah, they still vote for the Democrats as the lesser evil. They may even provide a class perspective on how the corporate rulers run America. They may actually accurately explain why our living conditions steadily worsen, and that this continues no matter who is president, a Democrat or Republican. But very few of these liberal leftist people actually say this during an election year. Then they sing a different tune. Instead, every election season, we are told we must first defeat the fascist threat and then build our movement. This has been an effective strategy to trap our movement in the Democratic Party for generations. Not only does it reinforce domination by the corporate America, not only does it miseducate people about fascism, but it also obstructs the working class to struggle to combat our worsening living conditions. Now, when does a ruling class need fascism? That's something that these people do not think about or really address. So long as the corporate America has the working class and the liberal left, not only corporate America, but any corporate capitalist country in the world, has the working class and the liberal left tied to their two-party system, as in the case today in the US, they have no need for fascism. They only need fascism when their customary methods of rule break down and they face a very direct threat of losing control of the country to revolutionary forces. The historic function of fascism, as the Nazis show, is to smash the radicalizing working class and its allies, destroy their organizations, and shut down political liberties when the corporate rulers find themselves unable to govern through their charade of democracy. This is far from the case in the US today. It has been habitual for the liberal left to emphasize the crimes of Republicans engineer against working people, both here and abroad. And they also help to cover up those crimes, the same kind of crimes, when committed by Democrats. And this only serves to help channel people into the Democratic Party because they are misfed information that the Democrats are somehow not as bad as the Republicans. By labeling the crimes of Trump and Republicans as fascist just propagates the just so story that imperialism is not as bad under the Democrats. But let us remember some little examples from history. Now, in World War II, the country, or the people that suffered the biggest slaughter by the Nazis were in Belarus, where 25% of their people were wiped out in the war. But the US equaled the same amount of mass murder just a few years later when it killed 25% of the North Korean people under the Democratic President Harry Truman. Now, a model liberal Democratic president, the model, I suppose, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, he imprisoned a whole ethnic group, just like Hitler did. And it was indefinite imprisonment. They didn't know when you were going to get out. And you also lost all your property. But it was not just, 100% Japanese Americans who FDR locked up. If you had just one great grandparent who was Japanese, you were locked up indefinitely, which is kind of very similar to, if you're 1/16 black, that means you're black and a slave back before in history. Remember, it was a liberal Democrat who warned us against warmongering Republican candidate in 1964, and as soon as he got into office, he launched the mass slaughter in Vietnam. It was a liberal Democrat, Barack Obama, that legalized indefinite military detention of US citizens without charge. So it miseducates people to spread the myth that imperialist brutality somehow depends upon which party rules. Those who push the Trump fascism story are just signaling to everybody that their own attachment to the Democrats in the two-party system, their refusal to break with the Democrats in the two-party system. Historically, these types of liberal leftists have been a powerful obstacle in the face of a working class movement, a politically independent working class movement that's politically independent of the 1%. Now, I've seen some people like to proclaim that the US is fascist, as if it somehow shows their ability at radical class analysis. Some leftists think that declaring the US as fascist creates some kind of political victory for us, as if we have achieved a blow to our class enemy. We have not. Our redefinition, our renaming of our enemy is not some kind of working class victory. What impacts our enemy is our effectiveness in organizing working people against them. Nothing else impacts them. Renaming them does nothing. But now, if the US were no longer a bourgeois democratic class dictatorship, but a fascist one, then that would clearly call for new methods of struggle, given the drastically change conditions that we would be living under. So what do these people who say the U.S. is fascist now under Trump, do they propose any new methods of struggle under the new fascist regime? They don't propose anything different than they did before. That shows that the people who say the U.S. is fascist recognize there's been no change in the ruling class's form of rule. They just called the U.S. government a new bad word and passed this off as Marxist analysis, as if this was some kind of win for us. This also signifies a further attachment of leftists to the Democratic Party, even to surrender to the Democratic Party. Why? Because the story of the U.S. being fascist makes the rounds when Republicans are in office, signifying that the Democrats are not fascist, or they're less fascist, or therefore they're the lesser evil. So they're better to work with, and we should unite with them whenever we can. So throw out the window building some independent working class movement. To go over some things, people kind of forget what liberal democracy actually means in practice, how nasty it is. We should remember that with Snowden, before Trump was president, he was telling us that the government is monitoring every phone call we make, every transaction we make in a store, and everything we do on the computer. I mean, that's like complete state control. So it's already there. You could say, well, the fact that Trump used U.S. troops and recently in Los Angeles, maybe that's some kind of fascist operation. But that the U.S. as a liberal democracy has always used U.S. troops to crush rebellions. The first time the U.S. did it was back in the 1780s during the Shays Rebellion, 1786, 1787. The U.S. government used more troops to put down the Shays Rebellion than they used against the British in the Revolutionary War. Later, going back even to Andrew Jackson, 1834 is the first example I could find of U.S. government using troops to break a strike. We saw many times after that the U.S. government using troops to break strikes. 1877, the Pullman strike, 1894. We saw back in 1932 when the U.S. government with 5 tanks and with troops with bayonets attacked the U.S. World War I veterans in 1931, wanting their bonus money for work in the war. The military was used against auto workers back in the 1930s. I could go on to endless examples of the U.S. government using the military against the people in uprisings when they cannot control the situation. I don't know if anybody would say that that's fascism when that happens, but it's just, this is what bourgeois democracy does to maintain its rule. It's not, some kind of fascism that's behind it. That's just how they operate. And we ought to remember that Bill Clinton used the military to attack, again with tanks, and murdered 86 men, women, and children in Waco, Texas. 86 people. I forgot there was that many. And if we saw MAGA people lynching Latinos and Trump doing nothing, that would not be fascist rule. But that's exactly what FDR did in the 1930s, when about 100 blacks were lynched during his years in the 1930s when he was president, and he did nothing about it. And bourgeois democracy also has periods of tremendous anti-working class and anti-communist witch hunts. We had them in the 1880s, back in the 1920s. And back in the 1940s, which really began before so-called McCarthyism, I think McCarthyism was kind of a later phase of that witch hunting. Um, now I end, see, with a little mentioned about the war in Iraq. I'll give a quote from Eugene Debs when he said these words about war. He said, "The master class has always declared the wars. The subject class has always fought the battles. In all the history of the world, you, the people, have never had a voice in declaring war. And strange as it certainly appears, no war in any nation, in any age, has ever been declared by the people." And here, let me emphasize the fact, and it cannot be repeated too often, that the working class who fight all the battles, the working class who make the supreme sacrifices, the working class who freely shed their blood and furnish the corpses, have never yet had a voice in either declaring war or making peace. It is the ruling class that invariably does both. They alone declare war and they alone make peace. If war is right, let it be declared by the people. You are the ones with you who have your lives to lose. You certainly, above all others, have the right to decide the momentous issues of war and peace. That speech by Eugene Debs got him 10 years in prison back in 2019-18. He appealed it to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court unanimously upheld his 10-year conviction. But that's not fascism. That's just standard bourgeois democratic rule. And we have to be clear about what the distinction between these two are. So I'm finished.
Well, thank you, Stan. That was terrific, and it does make you proud to be an American, doesn't it? But um, I think this is a very good reality check, but we're going to have a very robust, I'm sure, Q&A um, to dissect this and maybe deconstruct it. But before we get into the Q&A, I wanted to make an announcement about what our next program will be next week. We'll be on the same topic, fascism in the United States. Our speaker will be John Bellamy Foster. John Bellamy Foster is a very distinguished Marxist um, academic and activist. He's the longtime editor of Monthly Review, and he will be discussing more about the current dangers within the United States. He may be giving a somewhat different view or nuanced different view, but highly recommend joining that discussion. Foster is one of the really outstanding Marxist intellectuals in the United States. Um, so we do ask you to donate to our website, at our website. And with that said, we'll go to the Q&A. I will be taking hands up. And for those of you who are new to the Marxist Forum, our rules of engagement is, first of all, comradely discussion, absolute respect for everyone. And we've been very proud of fostering that type of culture where we can disagree, but it never gets acrimonious, or shouldn't get acrimonious. If it does, you'll get silenced by the technical people. And each person will get their turn to speak. It'll be a 2-minute chance to either ask a question and or make a comment, after which our guest has as much time as he would like to respond. And with that said, I am going to invite Sharon Rose to unmute herself and ask the first question. Sharon, if you could unmute yourself. You can't unmute yourself. Okay, then Mehmet, can you go? It's, there seems to be a problem. Um, And I'm not.
No, no, it's unmute. It was unavailable, so Sharon can go. Now people can unmute themselves.
Okay, thank
Okay,
you.
thank you. Yes, thank you. That's what I was trying to signal. Thank you, Stan. I'm, I'm sure that you're largely correct, and that bourgeois neoliberalism takes different tacks at different times, but it's all one and the same rule by the capitalist class. But I'm wondering if you can comment. It's definitely true that these days that there's an escalation of state repression. Has it been the only time? No, as you pointed out for historical examples, but the attacks on international students, the and especially the students who are part of the growing pro-Palestine movement, the 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 apparent shutting down of certain key nationalities from coming, national groups from coming to the United States. And apparently they're not, Trump doesn't want to have any Chinese students in the country. The travel bans that are expanding, and they're threatening to have more. And so there'll be very few countries where people can freely come to the United States. The crackdown or the loss of TPS, temporary protective status, for hundreds of thousands of people, especially Haitians and others, Salvadorans. It definitely seems like there's an increase of state repression. And what, of course, we need an independent fight back against that. But I was wondering if you just could comment on some of those. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. You hear me okay? No?
No, your sound, the audio has been kind of weak.
You hear me better now? No?
Well, perhaps a little. I don't know.
I don't know why. This is very loud where I am.
Okay. We can hear you.
Yeah, I think in the United States there are waves. It's if working people and the population is out protesting for their rights, then they have more space. They gain more space for themselves to exercise their rights. And when they become passive, then the rulers start clamping down more and more. I guess I first kind of noticed that when we look at all the social services in the U.S. that we won in the 60s and early 70s, and how they were slowly taken away by people became less politically active, and neoliberalism took over. They increasingly started privatizing all these social services. But I think that also happens with people's democratic rights. When they're not out there in mass defending their rights, and the government doesn't have to give them concessions, then the government also starts taking away their rights. And it's just like the waves of, they just go in waves like that, I think. That would be my answer.
I think we're going to probably come back to that, and this may even be a theme of this Q&A. But next person is Mehmet, followed by Richard Wright.
Thank you, both Roger and Stan. Good presentation. I have few differences in approaching fascism. You seem to approach fascism from what the liberal leftists look at Trump fascism. Now, Trump has problems, but fascism seems to be systematic. What happens is that, as you mentioned, when the capitalists, when the ruling classes feel threatened, That's a measure that they bring. They can override their own laws and everything and bring much more authoritarian things, and especially in the monopoly capitalist stage, in imperialist stage, the most bloodiest dictatorship of the bourgeoisie is called fascism. It has nothing to do with Trump. Trump will come and go. Democrats will come and go. But fascism, for the sake of the system, will have to stay. The reason first is that with the problems capitalism, especially in the US, that they are experiencing, it brings paranoia. And they know that the Gen Z and the others are not really that scared of communism, socialism anymore. And they are thinking about socialism now. So this is a threat. And they know that the United States has to become a third world country if the current exploitation has to go. But will the people of United States take it? So with their paranoia and their preparation for this, fascism can come. And the other thing is that you are modeling fascism with the examples that you've given to Hitler's one by one. He in the third week he did this. Yes, they did that. That's classical fascism. But as Dimitro has written, fascism has so many different forms depending on geography, history, populations, the culture, so on and so forth. But one thing that remains is the bloodiest dictatorship of the capitalist classes, and that can take different forms. Like he gives the example in southern Europe, I believe, is that the parliament stays open. There are even communist parties in the parliament under fascism. So I don't think that one-to-one, comparison of Hitler's fascism to today really does justice. Thank you.
I would say I just made that comparison with Hitler because of so many of these people I see in demonstrations and signs comparing Trump with Hitler. I guess they could compare it to Mussolini, but I don't see it, or maybe Tojo in Japan, but I don't see that, or any other fascist leader. So that's like the standard thing that they use. So that's what I used when I wrote that article. I don't know, I'm missing some of the other things that you were saying.
All I'm saying is that there could be different forms where you could have unions still active, you could have parliament active, but the different type of fascisms that we see, like let's say in what we see in Iran, what we see in Turkey, what we see in many other client states, they have been fascist. They have to be fascist in the age of imperialism, because in the age of imperialism, the way that the monopoly capital, the way that imperialism exerts its will is called fascism. And it can have many different forms at home or abroad. That's what I'm trying to say, is that Hitler, Mussolini, those are classical things we saw in 1930s, about 100 years ago. It has changed. It will change. It needs to change because capitalism itself has changed. Imperialism itself has changed. So did fascism. So that's why just saying that just because the leader doesn't have a toothbrush mustache, we don't have fascism is it's not gonna. I think it flies in the face of reality, I believe. Thank you.
All right, I think that would get into a rather complicated discussion of like what is capitalist class bourgeois democracy and what is fascism, which that'd be too complicated for me.
Okay, let's go on to the next speaker, which questioner, which will be Richard Wright, followed by Raj Sahai. So Richard, it's all yours.
Yeah, the downside is I'm about to follow up on Mehmet's comments. You're not going to get out of it that easy. Sorry. Yeah, no, it was a pretty good presentation. One of the problems I had was that and I think Mehmet sort of alluded to this, is that you went back to what I regard as sort of the classic definition of, post or World War II fascism. And I'm wondering if maybe, the fascism is also a function of historic history, if you will. And as Mehmet pointed out, that the tactics that are involved are differ from this country to Turkey, to use Mehmet's, and various other places. And so in that respect, and sort of complementing that, I guess one of the questions I had was, it seems that post the Vietnam War era here in this country, and I gotta say that I mean, I grew up during the Vietnam War, and a lot of my friends were adopting the fascism moniker, if you will. But it seems to me that a lot of the tactics that have been brought into the movement these days are from the peace and justice and the witness movements, not so much from the labor movements, if you will. And I think that is sort of a national characteristic there. The United States never really had, as a latecomer to the labor movements, which saw a lot more militant person-to-person, advocacies. Here we seem to have resorted to the courts, and we've sort of abrogated activism into the court movements. I don't know if that's making any sense or not, but I'll just allow you to comment on that, if you would, please. Thank you.
Well, I would say that when I wrote that article and what I was arguing about fascism, I didn't want to get into like a definition of what is fascism or bourgeois democracy. It was more to point out that these people who say that Trump is a fascist or that the US is now fascist, they do that as a reason to get people to vote Democratic. That's why they do it. Because they cannot really argue, Biden is so much better. Like, he was so much nicer to Palestinians than Trump or something, or whatever. That they can't really argue anything progressive about the Democrats, so all they do is make the Republicans into being some kind of monster. Like, well, he's a Hitler, so of course you gotta vote against this. You don't want a Hitler. Doesn't matter what the other guy is. I think that is a real issue that I see behind these people saying that Trump is a fascist. A lot of your other argument, yeah, it's what you say is true. I can't argue with that. And I do know, well, I did say I took it out that I have read, and maybe many of you have read, that Hitler took a lot of his racial theories and programs and practices from what he learned of U.S. history. They're all their U.S. racist history towards blacks, the racist history towards the Native Americans, and all the U.S. manifest destiny, which is, that's basically what Hitler meant by Lebensraum. That's what they want in Eastern Europe, to remove all the populations and wipe them out and replace them with good white Anglo-Saxon Protestant stock. That's the whole history of the United States has been that WASP people should run the world because we're closest to God, and then it's our manifest destiny. Now, certainly, I mean, you could say that's very extremely fascist if you want, yeah. But that's, I guess, all I can say.
Yeah, I think that's good. I think the take-home message I think we're getting from your presentation is that when people say our democracy is being threatened, they have an illusion about some sort of democracy that we never had. It's sort of like the flip side of "Make America Great," that America was once great. The left liberals have that same type of illusion that sometime at one time there was sort of this ideal democratic polity that was very, very nice. When I think your presentation had us understanding kind of more what um, democracy looks like under the United States form. Our next speaker, our next person is Raj.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Stan. Yes, I agree with you. Um, those who are trying to argue against Trump as a fascist are trying to drag working people in the tent of liberal or whatever Democratic Party, which is bankrupt too. So, but it's important because it's an educational program to talk about what fascism is, and you gave some very good examples of how fascist Germany acted. But what Mehmet said is very, very important, which is it's a terroristic dictatorship of finance capital. This is Dimitrov's definition. And the question is, why is it needed? And the need is because you have come up against a blockage that you cannot remove otherwise by other means of market. And I think this is why both parties are veering towards more and more. And you yourself pointed out that Obama had uh, authorized essentially wiretapping of everybody's, internet, so phone and everything. So there is a tendency towards over control over society because capitalism is not able to function and people are not able to live as they used to be able to live. So I think the system is veering towards, generalized towards fascistic tendencies, and both parties are doing it. I think that's a better argument. I would like your comment on that. Thank you, Stan.
Um, so Dmitriev said that fascism is a dictatorship of finance capital.
Terroristic, terroristic, most terroristic dictatorship of finance capital.
Okay. Yes, I would agree with that. But I also think, when the Venezuelan government talks about what the US does and what Israel does around the world, they often call it fascist. And I guess if we read about what Britain has done around the world over the centuries, how many tens of millions of people that Britain killed. I mean, just in India, it's probably over 100 million. That was always like a bourgeois democracy that did it. I guess you could say it was always imperialism is a terrorist dictatorship of finance capital. Because all these countries, whether they were fascist or non-fascist, their attitude towards all the third world countries, their colonies, was basically a terrorist dictatorship where they just eliminate whoever they wanted to, where they didn't have any qualms about it. In their own countries, maybe they give some democratic rights to their peoples, and the more fascist ones, like under Mussolini's Italy or Hitler's Germany, they didn't give them hardly any democratic rights. But we do have to keep in mind that if you look at all through the history of the when white people started conquering the world, it was an endless slaughter of non-white peoples that's been going on for like 700 years. I mean, that was just gross terrorism. I mean, look at the Spanish in Latin America. I take whatever example. It's not really, they're not really told it that well, but it's not any different than what Hitler was like and what he did in Eastern Europe. But I don't know if am I addressing your question?
Actually, you're mixing things, in my opinion. Uh, I mean, the kings also slaughtered a lot of people, but we're studying capitalism, and you're right, 140 million people, according to some people, died in India directly out of result of policies of Britain, but I wouldn't categorize it as fascist dictatorship. I think it was colonial plunder and so forth, but it was at the period of rising British capitalism. So it's a different kind of fish. I'm not saying it was kind. In Bengal, one third of the population died immediately after they took power because of the laws they changed. And during Second World War, 3 million people died in Bengal from a man-made famine because they wanted to have reserve of food for the Allied troops, which wasn't ever needed. So, I mean, methods of capitalism are, in war are brutal, but there is a precise definition of what fascism. That's all I was saying. Neither of them are kind. And one other comment I just quickly want to make is that people do decide to go to war. I think people under Stalin, when he fought in the Second World War, was a war that Russian people decided, working people decided to fight and destroy fascism. That's an example of it.
Okay, let's maybe go on to the next speaker, which will be Lucy Rios, followed by Jean Rule. So Lucy, it's all yours, and if you could unmute yourself. Thank
Oh,
you.
thank you very much, Stan. I tend to agree with you, but I still have questions because I wonder why the ruling class, why would the ruling class pick this man who is such an idiot, and yet he he terrorizes the people. He has a way of even if he doesn't pick up that many undocumented workers, the fact is that he puts terror in these communities, in the poor communities. So I think that the purpose of the fascism may be precisely that, to terrorize, because they know that sooner or later there will be a big recession plus a big war. They already started, and people don't like that. They can't keep the people from, if they don't find a way to suppress discontent, then that's my opinion, that they may have picked him because of his not so much because he resembles or doesn't resemble not the Nazis, but because he can terrorize the people into submission. And that's one thing that they probably are going to need if they want to fight a third world war. Anyway, that's my opinion, but you can, if you want to comment on it. In other words, I'm not positively sure that we have fascism or not, but that we have a very repressive government that I think would not hesitate to come down on people very hard, I think. Yeah. And we still have to maybe at least form a very broad united front against any attacks of that kind. Not necessarily vote for the Democrats again, but we should have an alternate party. Yeah.
I different things that you said. I don't think people are intimidated by, well, if you're not, if you don't have legal papers to be here, I guess, you're,
Yeah.
you're intimidated and terrorized,
So
but not,
everybody is intimidated. That's my opinion. All the Latinos, regardless of whether they have papers or not, are intimidated because in other raids in the past, they had been picked up and they have been deported and they have been separated from their children. And this kind of terror is real. It is hurt. It does hurt the community.
right. On the other hand, I know I went to that anti-Trump marches in Chicago. It was like, maybe if it was 100,000 people, I would not be surprised.
Mm,
And there was an awful lot of Latinos in it.
right.
A lot of some people, I guess, are intimidated, and other people are just really pissed off.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So I
Oh,
don't
yeah.
know how well Trump can, I don't know how many people demonstrated that, what, last Saturday, 2 Saturdays ago?
Yeah.
I mean, there was millions.
In LA, for instance, look at the riots. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I
Yeah.
mean, you can't say that they're intimidated, right?
Well, okay. There is anger. There is extreme anger that's building up. But I think some people are very afraid.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I think that they are using it
Yeah.
to well, okay.
Okay,
That's it.
good point made. And our next person is Jean Rule. Cool Rule. Unmute yourself, please.
Okay, I'm unmuted now, I think. Okay, Stan, thank you so much for that talk. It was great, and I kind of feel that all your points should be put on little post-it notes and hang them from my ceiling to remind me about the reality that we live in. Um, but my own take on Trump is that he belongs in the big house, not the White House, because basically that's what we do with rapists. And Trump has raped 32 women adjudicated. And as far as I could tell, although the Nazis tended to rape a lot of people, Hitler himself never raped anyone. So that's a little contrast we have here. But that brings me around to kind of my point, is our treatment of women here in the United States, particularly over the issue of reproductive rights. The Nazi view was, of course, women, children, kitchen, and church. Those were the domains of women. And to a certain extent, in terms of the laws and what's the battle over reproductive rights, something similar is going on. If read things that are happening in various parts of the country over the repression of women and so forth. It's really, really, really disgusting. So I wanted to throw those ideas out and see if your comments on that.
About the oppression of women, you say what's your
Specifically, the repression of women in general over things about equal pay and so forth. Voting rights has been a long-standing issue going way back in the United States, but now currently over reproductive rights, the right of women to control their bodies. That's under attack, particularly under the Trump regime. So yeah.
yeah, that's true. I'm not sure how you want me to answer your.
Well, I just wanted to make the point and see if you had any thoughts on the topic, because it's something I feel pretty strongly about. And I try to make that the point about, reproductive rights being threatened in this country, particularly by Trump and the right wing.
Right, I think that is a major threat to the whole working class, that all working people should back women's rights to abortion, because it's basically to drive women out of the workplace, drive them back into the home, be subservient to men. Because if you you no longer have control of your own body, and when you're going to be a parent or when you're not going to be, and it's in hands of the government, that's a pretty basic freedom that you're being denied.
Thank you. And Mao said that women hold up half the sky, and maybe more than half. So anyway, I just want
Very
to.
good. So next is Citizen, followed by Janet Coburn. So Citizen, are you still there? Yes, you are. And if you could unmute yourself.
Yes, thank you very much. Stan, since you have been referring to the workers today, I want to just comment on something that you said in your January 19th appearance this year, entitled Compatible Left in the Service of Imperialism. And so I just wanted to comment in that context on my question and your response at 57 minutes into the program. Again, that's January 19th, Compatible Leftists in the Service of Imperialism. Your very example back then about railroad workers and a common interest to gain a passable union contract otherwise shows that they're often individual minority, what's called intersectionality identities, indeed do not prevent them from sufficiently achieving a common goal as workers to achieve a union contract. But I rhetorically ask, how does a union contract save a Black worker from police brutality or even being shot and killed by the police? And how does a union contract prevent a George Floyd or Elijah Muhammad or Sandra Bland or countless other murders by the police? But anti-so-called identity politics wants us on the back burner. But then how would Black people even survive to fight the capitalist issue? How does a union contract save Black people from instances of blatant discrimination in medical institutions? How does a union contract save Black people from discrimination in the credit lending markets or having to pay more for the same amount of insurance as white people? How does a union contract save Black people from housing discrimination?
2 minutes, 2 minutes.
Oh, okay. Often much more obvious than in the Bay Area. I could go on and on about things that don't save Black people from oppression. I'll just wrap up by saying that, white workers get to go home after the end of their shift as just workers, but Black, Latino, gay, trans, etc. minority workers don't. It's racism, homophobia, patriarchy, and other discrimination that divides class and workers, not so much identity politics. And it's not I who won't let institutional white society forget that I'm Black, but it's institutional white society, especially white racists, right wing who would otherwise side with the oppressor, or white liberal racists who won't let me forget that I'm Black. And this is what would create division among workers. Thank you. That's just a comment. You don't necessarily have to respond to that.
Well, I wanted to say that if I was criticizing identity politics back then, I meant identity politics as putting that above class issues.
Well, we can't separate the two.
Well, I'm not going to separate them, but I would say that, these are the most oppressed sections of the working class. That's why we should be supporting these people. Women, Blacks, Latinos, trans people.
Well, not to be argumentative, it's not putting it above, but making it equal. Because if I can't survive being Black, I can't survive the class issue. You yourself raised a form of identity politics when you're talking about the abortion issue. You said that must be addressed. That is not less important than the class issue. Thank you.
Yeah, I think maybe we'll go on unless you feel that we need, because we're getting into another sort of area. But I think maybe Janet, if you can take the stage of.
Okay. So thank you for your presentation, Stan. Let me start by quoting something Aimé Césaire said. Quote, fascism is essentially colonialism brought home. You might want to comment on that later, but let me say that I want to kind of shift to something else. I agree that this is not about what Trump has done or just about what he has done. Now, going back to the changes to the police you described that were made in Nazi Germany, what came to mind is the growing militarization of the police and police violence that has been going on in the US over decades, no matter which political party is in power, especially, sorry, since October 7th. Sorry. And how would you compare police training in many US cities by Israel to the Nazi model? So, the police are being trained by Israel. And finally, related to that, how would you characterize how Israel has, in a sense, colonized the US government, and also with all these anti-Semitic laws being passed in various US cities and states, and how it relates to fascism?
Well, I don't, growing up in the United States and seeing anti-Semitism actual anti-Semitism long time ago, I don't believe that the U.S. is not going to let Israel or not going to let Jews run the United States. they're too waspy. They're not going to do that. They might say that
Zionists. I mean, it's
yeah, well, they use the Zionists for their own purposes. But I remember when I used to work on the Cuba work, they'd often say, well, it's the Miami Cubans are doing this stuff against Cuba. It's not really the U.S. government, but really it's the U.S. government. They just set out this puppet there to look like they're the one responsible. But I would agree, I guess, yeah, what Amir said, Cesar, that's how you say his name, Aimé Césaire, said about fascism as colonialism
brought home.
brought home. But I guess I should say, if I was going to redo this more, I would redefine, I guess, what I meant by fascism. Is it the fascism that I see among the Nazis and among Mussolini is that they were mass movements. They were popular mass movements. They were not just like, terrorism. They weren't, they were a mass movement. And Hitler was very popular. And he was even popular as being some version of socialist, just as Mussolini had been a socialist. Maybe like Bukele, like in El Salvador. But I think I would call fascism as an integral part of fascism is that it's a popular mass movement. What else you're saying about Israel? Well, yeah, Israel is involved, and they are using all these tools that the U.S. will use later. But Israel has their own population of guinea pigs, the Palestinians, to use all these nasty tools on, and they're doing the U.S. government a favor by you do all this experimenting on these populations, so we don't have to do it. We'll just learn from you, and then when you've learned how to do it, then you come over here and teach us how to do it, because we're going to use it later. I think that's what the U.S. is doing there.
Okay, let's go on to Michael, followed by Doma Harrison.
Hi, I wanted to comment. for one thing, you said you can vote for one of the two major corporate parties. Well, I don't do that. I won't vote for third party. What if you vote either Green or Peace and Freedom? Aren't those socialist parties? And the other thing, I mean, you talked about how it's not, how we're not comparable to fascist Germany. Well, Mussolini defined fascism as the merger of government and corporate rule. So by Mussolini's definition, we would be fascist. How, if you don't think we're comparable to Hitler's Germany, how comparable do you think we are to Mussolini's Italy?
Well, with that definition, then every capitalist country would be fascist. Because they're all emerging of government and corporate
Yeah, I
power,
agree.
all of them.
Well then aren't all capitalist countries then fascist?
Well, yeah, but then that term doesn't have any meaning. Might as well just say capitalist country.
Well, the meaning is that it's not the socialist or communist country. I mean those countries that we demonize, that we have sanctions against. I mean, wouldn't those then not be fascist because they're against our rule, but do it going against the corporation's interests? That's why we have sanctions against certain countries. That's why we've always overthrown a bunch of democracies and supported dictatorships. They've gone against our corporate rule. And of course, I thought this back when we had even some dictatorships, like back when we had the Soviet Union, they went against our rule, against the corporations, and that's why. So wouldn't those countries that go against us then not be fascist?
Well, yeah, but I mean, if that kind of definition of fascism, then that's like, well, everybody's fascist. Every government's fascist. I think the thing to keep in mind, I think about like, wow, Germany, I know better than Italy. So Hitler was very popular when he was, the first years he was in power. He was very, very popular. They thought that he was saving Germany from what they had to endure after World War I. He was not some kind of like, you know, barbaric dictator to a lot of German people. They thought, you know, he was making Germany great again, basically. And that's what he was doing up till like he made the bad idea to go to war with the Soviet Union. But we have to keep in mind about any definition of fascism, that it's not just like a military dictatorship or a police dictatorship. It's a large part, it's a popular mass movement.
Okay, the next person.
Roger, before we go, may I interject for information? Our website is up and it's available for your contributions and to look at other programs. Thank you.
Thank you for that.
Okay, now my turn. Thank you. Hello, everybody. Stan, I appreciate enormously your distinctions about the arrangement of our forces. We'll leave it at that. The whole commentary you made today was totally acceptable to me. I have been arguing against participation with Democrat for a long time. I do Peace and Freedom Party, but they're declaredly for socialism. In the meantime, I have discovered people don't want to organize to become workers. People want to organize. About 70 years ago, when I was being forced to study to teach school, which I hated to do from the beginning, but thought I had no choice, I read Paul and Percival Goodman have a book, Communitas, wherein they said a 4-hour work week would overproduce. And I'm sure you understand what the meaning of that is. It doesn't mean that you would be limited each day to 4 hours a day. It means that today you are limited to 8 hours a day and forced and brutalized by that structure. And you don't want to be. you want to be participant. In fact, what I argue from that is that we need to live age integrated. The babies need to be with the 90-year-olds and the 50-year-olds, and a wholly other structure to society. Trump, by the way, is leading us to having him decided by SCOTUS. He wants the Supreme Court to decide that he is entitled to rule forever, given the things that are coming forward on toward the Supreme Court. We will not be relieved if we continue, and I'm sure we are going to continue this direction. I liked your
2 minutes.
Hold on 1 minute now.
No, sorry, it's
Hold on. I'm going to follow Citizen of the Planet and say that talking about privatization of our social structure is very important to recognize that that's being done, that the stuff we argued for is being taken away from us. Anyway.
Thank you very much. And Stan, would you like to respond?
I'll take another. I don't have an answer.
Okay, well, I want to thank everybody for coming today. It was a very robust and interesting Q&A, and that come back next week and we'll continue this discussion with John Bellamy Foster. For that, have a good day and wishing you best.
Can you leave this chat open so I can read it?